Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out to join our webinar today entitled 3 Ways to Improve Early Warning Fraud Detection at the ATM. My name is Rudolf Smit, and I am the Head of Services for Stanchion Africa based in Cape Town, South Africa. Joining me today as co-presenter is Yugen Naidu. Yugen is the Vice President of Engineering Services for INETCO, and you'll get to hear from him in a short while when we delve into the technical aspects a bit more. So the key takeaways you'll get during our session today are, first, ways to increase your ability to detect and defuse front-end hacks and man-in-the-middle attacks, as well as some suggested fraud rules and real-time alerts for detecting suspicious transaction and card usage patterns. And then finally, also gaining better visibility into ATM and back-end vulnerabilities, as well as network blind spots. On the agenda, just looking at that, we'll start with a customer case study where we'll take a look at an incident where fraudsters launched a targeted, quite highly sophisticated fraud attack on one of Africa's largest FIs, and our Stanchion and INETCO were ultimately able to provide a solution to mitigate the risk of future attacks. Thereafter, Yugen will provide a view into the evolution of INETCO Insight, and combining this with other INETCO capabilities to remain on the forefront of early warning fraud detection. And then finally, there will be an opportunity for us at the end, just 15 minutes or so, for some questions. So please, if you think of any questions during the course of the webinar, please submit them and we can get to them at the end. Okay. So starting with the case study, I'll start with the attack. So roughly around mid-2016, one of the largest financial services groups in Africa was the target of a significant criminal attack. To give you a sense of the institution, they have more than 7,000 ATMs in their estate, over 40,000 POS devices, and serve upward of 10 million customer accounts in South Africa, in addition to having presence across 4 continents. The environment that they run is quite complex, and it includes multiple terminal driving switches, transaction switches, as well as multiple host systems, and an industry-leading fraud detection system. And the incident itself was reported, it was reported that roughly 100 people withdrew in the region of $19 million from 1,400 ATMs in one city, a single city, in just under 3 hours. Quite a mean feat. And if you break that down, it equates to just under $200,000 withdrawn from 14 ATMs on average per individual involved. And they would have had in the region of roughly 12 minutes to visit each of those ATMs. The incident was planned for and executed on a Sunday afternoon, no doubt for a number of reasons. For instance, there would have been low levels of vehicle traffic in and around the city, so they could get around quite easily. And potentially lower foot traffic at or around the ATMs. And finally, also, you would imagine skeleton staff at both the acquiring and issuing institutions, resulting in longer response times for their teams to intervene to any such threats. None of the financial institutions' internal fraud detection or auth systems identified or even had sight of this compromise, and they only became aware of a possible issue after being notified many hours later by the Card Association, who in turn noticed a drastic increase in transaction volume on the route. Ultimately, it was found that transactions were essentially being approved, in air quotes, within their network environment before reaching the switch, the fraud system, or the auth host, and therefore with no record at the application level thereof. If you think about this in a bit more detail, the in-depth knowledge required of payments to plan this exploit, producing counterfeit cards, having 100 people moving between ATMs, performing transactions in rapid succession, and introducing malware into the issuing institution's environment, most likely quite some time before the attack, you begin to appreciate the complexity of the attack and the level of coordination required, as well as to what lengths they would go to exploit financial institutions. So just moving on to slide 5, we've got 2 poll questions during the course of the session today. The first listed here being, do you have sufficient controls in place to identify and prevent fraud, front-end fraud attacks and exploits? Options there are yes, we can react immediately. Second option, yes, but we're susceptible to new types of attacks, or it may take some time to detect. And lastly, no, we don't consider this a credible threat. Please remember to submit your answers to the poll, whereafter you'll be able to see the results. So I will give some time for that. In the interim, in our experience, in most environments, it typically falls onto operational best practices, proper change management, mandates like PCI DSS, not only internal to an institution, but also from suppliers to try and minimize the risk of exploits. Ultimately, it is, however, vital to be able to detect these exploits when they do happen to minimize financial and reputational damage. So I'll just give a little bit more time for results to be submitted. Okay, so at 46.7, still some answers coming in, but currently 43% in the middle there. I'll give everybody a couple more seconds, maybe 5 more seconds, just to submit their answers, and then we can move on. Okay, gone. Okay, so just looking at the results, it seems like we've got some happy customers there at 23.5% potentially. Room for improvement at 47.1% in the middle. And a couple of prospective case studies, I think, for the next webinar there at the bottom at 29.4%. Thanks for that. Okay, moving on to the solution. Let me just change the slide here. So, due to the nature of the compromise, which targeted a network blind spot and for which they had no suitable detection mechanism, they had to take quite a unique approach to mitigating the risk of future attacks. So the requirements they had and communicated were, first and foremost, introducing a first line of defense capable of providing early warning of potential threats. It was also important that the mechanism should ideally be independent of various payments, applications, and channels. It should be able to be deployed quite rapidly, as this would be essential to reducing the window of opportunity for further attacks, and also ultimately to preserve the customer experience. In other words, you want to maintain system performance, but still be responsive enough to provide near real-time detection and alerting. Based on exposure to INETCO Insight during a proof of concept we did in their environment, they approached us to see whether it could in fact address these requirements. We were then able to work with them and apply our expertise in the payments, firstly knowledge of our products, of course, as well as in-depth knowledge of their specific environment to verify the fit and propose the detailed solution. Ultimately, that solution provided a couple of things. So firstly, tracking of transactions from the point of entry into their network, so confirming that they're processed and recorded by the switching applications. This is vital. This is a vital first step in being able to identify similar future attacks. In part, this is made possible by the way in which Insight gathers information directly from the network layer rather than typical application layer integration. And it then is able to form a picture of the flow of transactions across the environment by matching unique identifiers between the messages that it collects at various points in the environment. Furthermore, none of the existing applications needed to be modified, and implementing additional rules and alerts in future can therefore be done on a similar basis. INETCO Insight will trigger alerts when rule criteria are matched, and operators then have the ability to investigate the transaction flow using a single interface. So they don't have the burden of opening multiple or various application consoles, looking for traces in the unlikely event that they are actually available, and then manually trying to correlate the sources of information to find out what's going on. Stanchion and INETCO, together with the FI, were able to implement the project in a very aggressive 6-week time frame, which was crucial to prevent similar recurring attacks ASAP. And as I mentioned, given that there's no impact on applications and on the applications in play, we could implement the solution directly in their production environment. just moving on to the rules. Sorry, I'm just changing the slide here. So the rules that were implemented as part of the solution aim to do two things on a high level. First of all, identify when transactions are not correctly processed in the environment. So in other words, when processing integrity or transaction integrity is compromised. And then also to look for irregular transaction patterns, whether from a card or from a terminal perspective. So things like unexpected fallback or a concentration of transactions on a particular terminal. On the next couple of slides, Eugen will elaborate a bit more on how the scenario circumvents traditional risk monitoring and provide some specific examples of the rules that were introduced. Eugen, over to you.
Thank you, Rudolph, and good morning, everyone. So I'm going to spend some time on just a handful of the rules we created, which was used to mitigate the risk associated with this sort of attack. But before I get into the rules, I just want to re-emphasize that as we are collecting the transactions in real time at the packet level, sometimes across many protocols and links, we have access to the raw transaction information. And as such, we're able to inspect all elements of the transaction. This makes decisioning more holistic and inclusive, as we are able to see the transaction through its journey, from the acquiring side all the way to the back end, or as they go out to external payment network. Now getting back to the rules, the first rule you see, X number of international transactions within Y hours. Here, as the transaction comes in, we inspect the ISO 8583 message and pick out the country code. If the country code is different from ours, then we deem that they are international. We then start up a counter and alert if the preset threshold is breached. As a very simple example, if we get more than, say, 10 international transactions in 5 minutes, then we alert. The next rule is very similar. The difference being that here we are looking at international cards where we are acquiring the transaction. So in other words, transactions that we are acquiring on our very own ATMs or point devices. Here we pick up the bin from the ISO message and then compare this to a local bin list that is maintained in Insight. If the bin is not in the list, we deem the transaction as being done by an international card. We then start up another counter and alert if the preset threshold is breached. The third rule is more a remote on-us rule, where we are observing an implausible number of remote on-us transactions from the same foreign terminal. Here we look at other ISO 8583 fields, things like terminal ID and so forth. We can concatenate the terminal ID with other fields like card acceptor ID code, the card acceptor name, and the location. The next rule is an important rule until we rid the world of magstripe. Here we are alerting on an implausible number of fallback transactions that come from a specific ATM that may very well be under attack. Again, as we are monitoring at the network level, we are able to decode the ISO 8583 messages and strip out the AMP blocks, where we are able to determine if the transaction is fallback, in which case we can monitor the number of fallback transactions that originate from a specific ATM or card, and alert when we see too many of these. The last rule, and the one I would say is the most important, is where understanding the journey of the transaction is key to mitigating man-in-the-middle type attacks. In this rule, we are comparing the signature of a transaction on either side of a financial switch. If there are differences, this may be a sign that the switch has been compromised, in which case we can raise an alert. So in order to better understand this rule and how it applies broadly to man-in-the-middle type attacks, I'm going to take you through a couple of slides which draws it out a bit clearer. So in this slide, we can see a simplified version of a bank's infrastructure with a transaction switch that links the bank's acquiring POS and ATMs with the external payment network, where off-us transactions go out and remote transactions come in. Traditional fraud detection tools sit either inline, very close to the authorizing host, or sometimes we see them as an offline scheduled process. The next slide shows a signature of an advanced persistent threat. The way it works is very similar to the kinds of APTs we've seen over the past few years, and I certainly think we should be bracing ourselves for many more of these to come. In essence, what happens here is a worm somehow embeds itself in the transaction switch. Now, how the worm gets into a segregated PCI CDE is for definitely another discussion, but suffice it to say that this does happen. The worm lays idle until a specified time and is activated once the syndicate is ready to draw the funds from the ATMs. Counterfeit cards are used in a coordinated attack at local or foreign devices, making a large number of withdrawals within a set time objective. The worm forces the switch into a scan-in mode, and the switch authorizes the transaction. The transactions never go to the back end for authorization, and traditional fraud monitoring solutions never see the transactions and are therefore unable to act. The attack can go completely unnoticed up until settlements occur. By that time, the syndicate has long gone. There is no way to stop this from happening again using traditional methods. So this may end up being persistent. Now, because Insight is able to monitor transactions across every link that could be part of a bank's infrastructure, we are very easily able to tell when we see a transaction on one link and not on another. And when this does happen, we can raise an alert. Man-in-the-middle attacks have also been known to manipulate the authorization request, changing details like values, accounts, and so forth. Again, because we are monitoring many links and all the raw transaction information, including values and transaction timing, Insight is able to pick up when transactions have been tampered with. So in essence, we are able to eliminate blind spots on the network by providing better visibility of transactions through the transaction journey. Back to you, Rudolf.
Thanks, Eugen. So just circling back to the case study and taking into account what Eugen presented, so you can see there are a number of clear benefits realized through the solution. Firstly, after adjusting rules to an acceptable false positive ratio, alerts are triggered in near real time for investigation and action by the fraud teams. They now also have this ability, like I mentioned, to investigate and troubleshoot alerts from a single application where they have data or access to data, detailed data, of at least 8 days. So this will include that network layer info and give you visibility on whether a particular application server is reached and therefore it is in play or not. The data provided by the solution gives insight typically not accessible in payments environments related to how much time also transactions would spend between several hops or between applications, which is ultimately invaluable in order to identify areas where performance optimization is required and can then be initiated. Ultimately, the solution complements the existing fraud detection systems by adding a new and versatile forward layer of defense to address these blind spots. Okay, Eugen, over to you again, just to have a look. You'll give us a view of things to come for the evolution of INETCO's fraud detection capability.
Okay, on to the evolution of INETCO's fraud detection. So in the next 2 slides, I'm going to be talking a bit about INETCO's core capabilities in the fraud detection space and where we're going with the solution. The insight and analytics boxes are capabilities we already have. The box in the reddish color, I think it's reddish color here, shows the capability we are working on and hope to release within the coming months. So just at the very top right here, analytics provides a near real-time view on potentially fraudulent transactions. Because it is built on a big data platform, it is able to store months and years of transaction information, which makes it particularly good for investigative sort of purposes, and scanning the data to pick up peculiar patterns that may have gone unnoticed. Once we pick up a pattern, we can implement a rule on Insight or any other fraud tool to stop this from happening again in the future. Analytics can also be used as a near real-time anomaly detection solution. Insight, on the other hand, is a real-time system. As it is collecting information in real time, it is able to alert when set thresholds are breached. There are also organizations that are using Insight as a real-time data feed with the open data access capability. And this allows organizations to make use of Insight's rich transaction data on systems of their choice. The last block I want to discuss is the machine learning capability that we are in the process of developing. Now, one of the biggest challenges we find with rule-based systems is selecting thresholds or parameters for the purposes of alerting. If the system is set too strict, we end up with too many false positives. If the rules are set a bit lax to reduce the false positives, then we miss fraudulent events. So finding the right balance is a challenge more often than not. Another challenge is that you're only able to pick up known fraud patterns based on the rules that you have created. There's very limited opportunity to pick up new fraud patterns on the fly. So we took a decision to add machine learning as a core competency to alleviate these issues. So going into a little bit more detail on this capability and the way it works, we will still continue to use Insight as the real-time transaction feed. The data is streamed in real time into two key components, an unsupervised and a supervised machine learning component. We call these fraud detection and anomaly detection components, respectively. Now, the anomaly detection component takes individual transactions and builds a behavioral profile for every customer and every ATM. When a new transaction comes in and the transaction doesn't match the behavioral profile for a specific customer or ATM, an alert is generated, it is scored, and it is sent out via the notifications component. If this anomaly is indeed fraud, it is labeled as such by the fraud analyst, and this is then used as training data for the fraud detection component. As the fraud detection component maintains the database of known fraudulent transactions, which comes from the training data, it is able to use its knowledge to intelligently mark transactions as fraud when it sees the same pattern in the future. In this way, anomalies that are unconfirmed cases are picked up and sent out to the fraud analyst and confirmed in that way. And transactions that match a confirmed fraud case are scored much higher and marked as such by the fraud detection capability. Now, obviously, the solution takes time to learn the behavioral profiles. However, once we have created a profile, the chances of false positives will be significantly lower, as we are no longer applying a broad brush approach, but one that focuses right down to every individual customer or ATM. We believe that machine learning adds a really important capability that improves over time the reliability of the fraud and transaction. So now we'll move on to the next poll, which I will read out. So which of the following benefits of real-time transaction monitoring is of interest to you? Real-time alerting, ability to investigate, customizable rules and alerts, or lastly, machine learning. So please can you go ahead and make your selection. I'll give you about 20 to 30 seconds to make your selection, and I will read out the results as soon as we close the poll. So please go ahead. Also, please don't forget to click submit so we get your selection. While you are busy with that, just very quickly, in recent years, we've seen many organizations look into the area of machine learning. We're finding that that's an area of particular interest with specific focus on the fraud detection space. And it's going to be really interesting to see the results of this poll, where the audience sits. So, give me another 5 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll right now. Okay, so I was reasonably right in my suggestion. It looks like the audience are also very much interested in machine learning, because as you can see, the biggest slice here comes in the machine learning space. Second is real-time alerting, which I think is definitely an area of focus in many organizations in this day and age, given the fact that most of these attacks that we're seeing are defrauding organizations on the cash side of things, in which case, you never have an opportunity to reverse a transaction like you have on a POS mode. Ability to investigate is next, and then creating customizable rules and alerts, obviously, at the tail end. So it seems that we are on the right track, and hopefully we'll give you an update pretty soon in terms of our machine learning capabilities. That's me. Back to you, Rudolph.
Thanks, Eugen. Okay. So just to come back to the takeaways that we want to leave you with for today. First and foremost, very importantly, end-to-end real-time transaction monitoring significantly strengthens your ability to detect and diffuse increasingly sophisticated front-end attacks and man-in-the-middle attacks. Secondly, fraud rules and real-time alerts can be implemented earlier in the processing cycle, i.e. upstream from the traditional fraud detection system, and will immediately detect suspicious transaction and card usage patterns. And then finally, a clear view of end-to-end transaction processing plays a fundamental role in protecting your payments infrastructure from the ATM all the way through your back-end systems. Over to Stacey for the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Great, and a big thank you to both of our speakers today, Eugen and Rudolph. Thank you very much. It was super informative. Now, we have had a number of questions coming in as you were speaking, and I'll just make my way through. Keep the questions coming in. We have some time, and we will try to get to them all. So the first one that came in, will the switch not identify duplication of unique fields like transaction verification number or other unique info from the ATM POS? Perhaps, Eugen, do you want to start with that?
Sorry, I'm just looking at the question here.
Yeah, I can also chime in on that one. So, sure. I mean, that would be possible in cases where the transaction actually hits the switch, right? And that is the typical assumption. In the case of our case study today, and what we're seeing with sophisticated attacks, is that the transactions don't even reach that point. And that's why the customer really needed a unique approach to trying to identify where and when these compromises occur. So yes, in the case where transactions reach the switch, for sure, this is unfortunately not what our customer was dealing with, and needed something to deal with that.
Right. They were dealing with more of a malware issue on the switch, which...
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Great. Second question. I work for one of the largest banks, not me, but the person that has actually put the question in Pakistan, which has around over 2,000 ATMs. ATM card skimming is the biggest problem that we currently face. We currently depend on customers to inform about fraudulent transactions in their accounts through SMS. My question is whether your online detection system will integrate with our core banking system or will generate billed history as a standalone system. Eugen, do you want to give that a shot?
Yes, certainly. And apologies because I was on the wrong tab, the Q&A tab, so I couldn't see that earlier question. But yeah, this question. So our system does work as a standalone system that works pulling copies off the network. So we are able to see these transactions come in. We are then able to integrate separately to a core banking system to provide a risk advice too. So we don't use necessarily the information that's stored at rest in the core banking system, which we can if we want to, but really the strength of INETCO is to be able to pull these transactions as they're happening in real time and to provide you with that risk advice as soon as you possibly can.
Great. Okay. All right, the next question. Once fraud is detected through your system, what options does an FI have to stop it before it affects all customers? Rudolph, do you want to try to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think in this case, what the solution does is able to alert into the organization, right, for fraud teams and operational teams to respond. So at that point in time, depending on what the profile of the attack is, they'll need to see what to do. If it is limited to specific cards or specific accounts, that's one thing. But I mean, I guess the early and the sophisticated attacks we're talking about here would in some cases result in actually shutting down that channel for some time due to mass exposure over a short period of time. But the solution will ultimately detect an alert and then require interaction or intervention from the organization. Eugen, I'm not sure if you want to chime in on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we are again providing a risk advice out, that risk advice could be used in other systems. Many organizations have what's called a channel manager to stop fraud from occurring. So that risk advice could be passed to the channel manager, or as syslog events, which go out to various support people in order to stop that fraud from occurring. Either stop the cards or close those accounts down temporarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered the second part of that question as well through that, right? So it speaks to what potential downtime or who it would affect. So through that management system, and depending on what the actual fraud is identified as and what the extent of it is, that would determine the impact to services and customers.
Yeah, I think that you guys have answered that nicely. I think you've also answered, do we automatically take the ATM down if a fraud attack does occur? It's something that's asked to us quite often, but I believe the answer right now is that we identify when those attacks occur, but the automation of taking the ATM down is something that's being planned for the future, or something that we're looking at potentially doing in the future with the machine learning. Is that correct, Eugen?
Partially correct. So right now we are able to do this by making use of existing tools that an organization would have. Usually those are infrastructure management tools. So again, this can be done if we are sending out the alert to a specific infrastructure management capability that has the ability to turn off the ATM. Where Stacey is going with this is that we are also trying to build that capability in-house, where our own agents are able to turn off the ATM if we pick up such an attack.
Great.
Yeah, and I think from my point of view, from Stanchion's point of view, so we obviously partner closely with companies like INETCO and use our system integration abilities to combine that to specific customer needs. So in cases where that might not be available today, in the payment systems that we understand and are experts at, can then take those notifications and turn them into actions on that environment. So that would be discussed and scoped with the client, and then we see how we can reach that outcome.
Okay. On one of the slides, there was mention of data forwarding. What transaction message fields do we have access to with that data forwarding? Are there APIs for specific fraud management systems? Yugen, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So in terms of data forwarding, all of the rich ISO 8583, let's say on the ATM side, maybe NDC Plus, Triton Connect, Agilus, you name all the kind of proprietary protocols that you have on the ATM side, all the kind of proprietary protocols you may have on the external payment network themselves, ISO 8583 based. All of the fields that come across the wire, we are able to capture. We build a rich transaction log for every transaction that goes across the wire. All of that information is available. So any system or any downstream system that needs specific fields can request this from the Insight system, and Insight will provide the kind of data fields that that system requires. The second part of the question is how can we integrate with other fraud tools? What APIs are available? So we do have a standard API that allows external systems to communicate with Insight. However, we find our, let's say, preferred means of integration is usually via syslog or via the open data access. So, so either of those two methods are usually used. We also have some proprietary data forwarding capabilities. Most of these are TCP based. So we are very flexible when it comes to being able to integrate with other third-party tools.
Okay. Thanks, Yugen. Next question. What if we're dealing with an encrypted environment? Rudolph, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, so I'll give it a shot, even though you gave it to me. But ultimately, we are definitely able to deal with that, right? So there would be some keys shared, and Insight would be able to decrypt and inspect the data, but that would obviously be done with the necessary controls in place. So encrypted communication is certainly supported.
Great.
Yeah,
Yugen, do you have anything? Yep.
Yeah, I think absolutely. In most of the environments we deal in, especially these payment environments, well, we always come up with a handful of encrypted links. And yeah, Insight is built with that capability already. So we are supporting many customers across the globe. And so yeah, the easiest way is definitely having the keys or the certificates installed on Insight itself, where Insight is in the PCI zone, or maybe not even in the PCI zone. But like you rightfully say, Rudolph, all the necessary controls need to be put in place so that those keys are not necessarily manhandled.
Okay. And the mention of PCI, the next question was, is the Insight product PCI compliant?
I'll take a stab at it. Yep. So yeah, absolutely. In order for us to be installed in the PCI zone, I think the right thing to do would be to be PCI compliant. So in whatever we do, from reading the PAN data and then processing that PAN in memory in real time, not storing the PAN information itself, creating cryptographic hashes, is all a PCI compliant process. So yeah, absolutely, we are PCI compliant.
Great, thank you. This other question ties into one that was asked a little bit earlier, and it's what performance impact does the product have on the payments environment? Will it affect the performance of the switch? Rudolph?
Yeah, so, by all accounts, it shouldn't. The data gets collected off the network layer, right? So we're not introducing any processing burden on any of the applications that are monitored across the system. I think if there are very custom integrations where we're asked to get the data from somewhere else, not off the network. That might be a case. But in this case, for example, where all of the data is just pulled off the network itself, there are no impacts to the individual applications in the process.
Okay, thank you. This next question I think I can answer. Will we get the case study? The answer is yes. Stanchion has done a wonderful job of capturing this case study. We'll be sharing that after the webinar. Can any channel be monitored? ATM, POS, internet banking, etc. And what protocols are supported as part of standard product? And this might be one of our last questions. I'm just looking at the time here, and we did say we would run this for 45 minutes. So if anybody has any other questions, we can maybe squeak one more in, but if not, we'll wrap it up with this one. And sorry, Eugen, do you want to take this one?
Yes, absolutely. So Insight is able to monitor a modern bank, an omni-channel environment. So, taking into consideration the mobile, the POS, the ATMs, internet banking, and, to a lesser degree, but still definitely areas we find a lot of interesting is also branch banking. So just to answer the second part of the question, the types of protocols or messages we are able to view or decode. I touched on it a bit earlier as well. So all the standard proprietary standard and proprietary don't go hand in hand, but anyway, it's all the proprietary protocols like the NCR, NDC Plus, all the conversions of NDC Plus itself, Tracking Connect, the DBO, Agilus, all variants of ISO 8583. We are working on ISO 20022 right now. So I think those are the majority of financial kind of transactions that we deal with. The more back-end kind of transactions, we are very able to do XML type transactions. We're able to do all sorts of SQL decodes. So I think the full gambit of capabilities or protocols we are able to decode at this point in time. That's standard with the product.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I think that wraps up the majority of the questions. Those that we did not get to, we will make sure that we reach out and answer your questions directly. A big thank you again to our audience for taking the time out today to join us. And thanks again to Rudolph and to you again for providing us with a lot of information that I think we can all take home and think about over the next couple of days. And if there's any other questions, as mentioned, we will be following up with a link to this recorded version of the webinar. You will also get a link to the case study. If there's anything else that you need or you require or any further information, conversations to be had, just reach out directly to either Rudolph or to Eugen or to Marketing at INETCO, and we'll be sure to help you out. And on that note, we hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will hopefully see you on our next webinar. Take care.